The 70-year-old housekeeper lost everything in the mansion fire. When the safe was opened, the millionaire family went into despair. In a gray autumn morning, the once grand Renshaw mansion stood in ruins, its majestic structure reduced to smoldering debris. The air was thick with the acrid scent of charred wood and the faint echo of crackling flames that had consumed the heart of the home. Margaret, the devoted housekeeper of 70 years, stood at the edge of the property, her eyes brimming with tears as she took in the devastation. The memories of laughter, family gatherings, and the warmth of the hearth flooded her mind, each recollection a poignant reminder of what had been lost. "Margaret!" a voice called out, breaking her reverie. It was Victor Renshaw, the patriarch of the family, his face a mask of frustration and despair. He approached her, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his overcoat, the chill of the morning air contrasting starkly with the fire that had consumed their lives. "Have you seen anything salvageable? Any furniture? Anything?" Margaret shook her head slowly, her heart aching for the man who had once been a boy running through the halls of this now ruined mansion. "I'm afraid not, sir. The flames took everything. The library, the drawing room, it's all gone." Victor cursed under his breath, his eyes darting around as though he could will the house to rebuild itself. "This is a disaster," he muttered, almost to himself. "Our family's legacy." "Your family's memories are not gone, Victor," Margaret interjected gently, stepping closer to him. "Those live on in you and your children. Remember that." He turned to her, his gaze piercing. "Memories don't pay the bills, Margaret. We're going to lose everything if we can't recover what was inside that house." Margaret felt a pang of sympathy for Victor, but she also recognized the desperation in his words. The fire had not just taken the mansion. It had laid bare the fragility of their lives, their status, and their relationships. "You still have your family," she offered, hoping to provide some comfort. "They are what truly matters." Victor scoffed, his frustration boiling over. "Family? Look around you. They'll be more concerned about their inheritance than about the loss of this place. They've always been more interested in money than in each other." Just then, the rest of the Renshaw family arrived, their expressions a mixture of shock and disbelief. Eloise, Victor's wife, stepped out of the car, her designer coat flapping in the wind. She clutched her handbag tightly, her eyes scanning the wreckage with a detached air. Julian and Clara followed closely behind, their faces pale and drawn. "What happened?" Clara's voice trembled as she took in the scene. "Is it really all gone?" "It's worse than we thought," Victor replied, his tone harsh. "Everything we've built is reduced to ash." Eloise's eyes narrowed as she scrutinized the remnants of their home. "What about the safe? The family heirlooms? Did you check?" Her voice was laced with anxiety, and it did not escape Margaret's notice that her concern seemed more about possessions than the loss of their home. "I'm sure it's gone too," Julian said, shaking his head. "What are we even going to do now? We can't just stand here watching it burn." Clara, visibly shaken, stepped forward. "We need to figure out what's next. We can't let this destroy us." Victor, still seething, threw his hands up in exasperation. "What do you propose we do, Clara? We're standing in the ashes of our lives. You think we can just pick up the pieces and move on?" Margaret watched the family's dynamics unravel before her. She had spent decades ensuring that the Renshaws maintained their image of unity and success, but now the cracks were widening and the foundation of their relationships seemed as fragile as the charred remains of their home. "I'll see what I can do," she said quietly, drawing. "The attention of the family. There may still be things we can salvage. Let's not lose hope just yet." Victor shot her a look of disdain. "Hope? Hope doesn't pay for repairs or replace what we've lost. You should know that by now, Margaret." Margaret met his gaze, unflinching. "Perhaps not, but it can guide us through this darkness. We need to support each other, not tear each other apart," she insisted. Eloise stepped closer to Victor, her voice low. "What if there are things in that safe? Things that could help us? We can't just give up without knowing what's inside. Julian nodded, his expression shifting from despair to determination. I agree. If there's anything left, we need to find it. We can't let this ruin us. Margaret felt a flicker of hope at Julian's words, but she also sensed the underlying tension. The desire for wealth and status had always been deeply ingrained in the Renshaw family, and with the house gone, those desires were now more pronounced than ever. Where is the safe? Clara asked, her voice stronger now. We need to find it. It might hold something valuable, something that can help us rebuild. I'll check the library, Victor replied, already moving away from the group, his mind racing with possibilities. It was in the back, near the fireplace. Stay here and try to keep calm. As Victor disappeared into the remnants of the library, Margaret felt a wave of unease wash over her. She had spent years observing the family's dynamics, and she understood the weight of secrets that hung in the air. She turned to Clara, who was visibly shaken but determined. Clara, remember that wealth isn't everything, she said softly. What truly matters is how you support each other right now. Clara nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I know, but it's hard not to think about what we've lost. Her voice trailed off, and she glanced toward the ruins of the mansion, where memories lingered like ghosts. Whatever happens, you're not alone, Margaret reassured her. You have a choice in how you respond to this. Moments later, Victor returned, his expression grim. It's not here, he said, frustration evident in his voice. The safe, it's gone. We have to find it. Maybe it's hidden somewhere else, Eloise suggested, her voice trembling. We can't assume it's lost forever. It has to be here somewhere. But as Margaret stood among them, the weight of the moment pressed heavily on her. She knew that the safe was not just a repository of valuables. It was a symbol of the family's past, one that could hold secrets they weren't prepared to face. She had seen the cracks in their relationships widen, and she wondered if the truth hidden within the safe would finally bring them together or tear them apart. As they continued to search the wreckage, Margaret's heart raced with the knowledge of what lay ahead. The discovery of the safe would not only reveal the family's material wealth, but could also unearth buried secrets that had the potential to change the course of their lives forever. With the embers of the fire still glowing in the air, she felt an undeniable sense of foreboding. The true test of the Renshaw family was yet to come. The sun struggled to break through the heavy clouds hanging over the remnants of the Renshaw mansion, casting a somber light on the charred ruins. Smoke still curled upward, mingling with the crisp autumn air, as Margaret stood among the ashes, her heart heavy with loss. She had spent nearly 5 decades caring for the Renshaw family, and now, with the house gone, she felt adrift. Memories flooded her mind. The laughter of the children echoing through the grand halls, the warmth of family gatherings, and the quiet moments spent dusting the countless books that lined the walls of the library. As she turned to face the family, who had just arrived, Margaret felt the palpable tension between them. Victor, the patriarch, stood with his arms crossed, his jaw clenched. He was a tall man with a commanding presence, but today he looked diminished, his usual bravado overshadowed by despair. Eloise, his wife, was a striking woman, but she seemed almost ethereal, her face pale and drawn as she stepped out of the car. Julian and Clara, their children, trailed behind, whispering anxiously to each other, their faces etched with uncertainty. Margaret, Victor called, his voice strained but authoritative. What do we know about the damage? Is there anything salvageable? His eyes darted around the property, searching for signs of hope amidst the devastation. Margaret hesitated, not wanting to dash his hopes. I'm afraid not, sir. The fire was too intense. Even the library your father's collection is mostly gone. Victor's face contorted with frustration. Damn it! Everything we built gone in an instant. He kicked a piece of debris, sending it skittering across the gravel driveway. We need to figure out what we can recover. The insurance. Eloise interrupted, her voice barely above a whisper. Victor, please. Can we not just mourn for a moment? This was our home." She looked around, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Our memories. Memories don't pay the bills." Victor shot back, his tone harsh. "We need to think practically." Julian, the eldest son, stepped in, trying to soften the atmosphere. "Dad, maybe we should take a break. Let's just regroup for a bit." "Regroup?" Victor snapped. "We're on the verge of losing everything. We can't afford to take breaks." Clara, the youngest, shifted uncomfortably, glancing at her father and then at her brother. "Maybe we should just go inside. Or what's left of it. We need to stick together, right?" Margaret watched the family's dynamics play out, feeling a mix of sympathy and concern. She had seen the fractures in their relationships long before the fire, and now they were laid bare, raw, and exposed. As they began to disperse, Margaret felt a pull toward the library, the one place that had always felt like home to her amidst the chaos of the Renshaw family. As she stepped inside the scorched remains of the library, she noticed something strange, a glimmer of metal peeking out from beneath a pile of books that had somehow escaped the flames. Intrigued, she knelt down, carefully lifting the charred tomes away. There it was, a coffer, old and ornate, its surface marred but intact. "Goodness," she murmured to herself, her fingers brushing over the cool metal as she contemplated the significance of this discovery. What could it contain? Was it valuable? Or perhaps it held secrets better left hidden. Suddenly, she heard footsteps approaching. Victor was back, his eyes narrowing as he noticed the coffer. "What have you found there, Margaret?" he asked, a mix of curiosity and suspicion in his voice. I'm not sure, sir," she replied, her heart racing. "It appears to be a coffer, likely containing something of importance." Victor's demeanor shifted instantly. "Important? How important?" He stepped closer, his eyes gleaming with a renewed sense of purpose. "Where did you find this?" "Under some books," she explained, her voice steady despite the flutter of anxiety in her chest. "It seems to have survived the fire." "Let's open it," he commanded, his excitement palpable. This could be the key to saving us. Margaret felt a wave of unease wash over her. "Victor, we don't know what's inside. It could be Dash. Could be what? Another dead end?" He interrupted, frustration bubbling to the surface again. "We have to take risks. If there's a chance this coffer contains something valuable, we must find out." As he reached for the latch, Margaret instinctively placed a hand on his arm. "Wait, we should think this through. This might reveal more than just monetary value. It could unearth secrets that Dash..." Victor shrugged her off, determination written on his face. "Secrets? Margaret, we've already lost everything. What more could they take? From us? We need to focus on our survival." With that, he opened the coffer with a sharp click, the sound echoing in the hollow space of the ruined library. Inside lay a collection of documents, their edges frayed, yellowed with age. Margaret felt a chill run down her spine as he pulled them out one by one, his excitement dimming with each page he examined. "Fraudulent contracts," he muttered, his brow furrowing. "What the hell is this?" A mixture of disbelief and anger colored his voice. This can't be right. Eloise appeared at the doorway, drawn by the commotion. "What's happening?" she asked, her expression shifting from concern to confusion as she noticed the documents in Victor's hands. "Just some old papers," he said dismissively, but his eyes betrayed his unease. "They seem questionable." Eloise approached, her eyes scanning the documents. "Victor, what do you mean questionable?" Julian and Clara joined them, drawn by the tension. "What's going on?" Julian asked, his curiosity piqued. Victor took a deep breath, holding up one of the pages. "These documents detail some sort of deceit. It looks like our family fortune, how we've made our money, wasn't entirely above board." The room fell silent. Clara's eyes widened, and Julian stepped forward, his face pale. "What are you saying? Our family was involved in illegal activities?" I don't know yet, Victor replied, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. But we need to find out. This could ruin us. Eloise's face blanched and she looked away, her mind racing. What if these documents reveal something about us? About our past? Maybe it's time we face the truth, Julian said, his voice shaking. We've been hiding from it for too long, haven't we? Margaret felt the weight of their despair. She had been a witness to their struggles, their secrets, and now, standing in the ruins of their former lives, she couldn't help but wonder if this was the beginning of a reckoning. You each have your own demons to confront, she said gently, her heart aching for them. Before we open the floodgates, perhaps we should reflect on what this means for each of you. Victor scoffed. We don't have time for reflection, Margaret. We need to act, and quickly. Or perhaps, Margaret countered, her voice steady, you all need to confront the consequences of your choices first. Look at what this fire has done to you. Before we delve into the past, you need to face your present. The family exchanged glances, uncertainty etched on their faces. Margaret could see the cracks beginning to form, the facade of control slipping. Perhaps, just perhaps, this was the moment they would start to confront their truths. Fine, Victor relented, his voice strained. Let's talk about it. But I'm telling you, these documents are the key to our future. And with that, the family began to unravel, each of them grappling not only with the loss of their home, but with the weight of their secrets. The coffer now a catalyst for change in a family desperately in need of healing. The air was thick with unspoken words, but for the first time, there was a glimmer of hope that perhaps they could start to rebuild. Not just a mansion, but the very foundation of their lives. Margaret stood by the window of the charred remains of the Renshaw mansion, her heart heavy with the memories that lingered in the air like the acrid scent of smoke. She had devoted her life to this family, nurturing their needs and desires, and now, as she gazed at the smoldering ruins, she felt an overwhelming sense of loss. The grandeur of the mansion was not just bricks and mortar to her. It was a living tapestry woven with laughter, tears, and the quiet moments shared over cups of tea. Margaret, a voice called softly from behind her. It was Clara, her once bright eyes now dulled by the weight of the world. Are you all right? Just reflecting, my dear, Margaret replied, turning to face the young woman. This place held so many memories for us all. Clara nodded, her brow furrowed with worry. I don't know what's going to happen now. With everything gone, it's like we've lost a part of ourselves. Margaret could see the turmoil in Clara's expression, a reflection of the chaos that surrounded them. The young woman had been trapped in a tumultuous relationship, and Margaret had always sensed the struggle brewing beneath the surface. You know, Clara, sometimes loss can be a catalyst for change. It forces us to confront the things we've been avoiding. What do you mean? Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Perhaps this is your chance to find your own path, Margaret encouraged gently, placing a comforting hand on Clara's shoulder. You deserve to be free of the shadows that hold you back. Clara took a deep breath, her eyes brightening momentarily. I want that, Margaret. I really do. As they spoke, the distant sounds of the Renshaw family's arrival broke through the haze of despair. Victor, Eloise, Julian, and Clara's brother Julian had come to survey the damage, their faces etched with shock and disbelief. Margaret felt a twinge of sympathy for them, but she also recognized the cracks in their facades. Each of them harbored secrets, hidden fears, and unspoken truths that had festered beneath the surface for far too long. Margaret, Victor called, his voice cutting through the air like a knife. We need to talk about the coffer I heard you found. It could contain something of value. She turned to face him, her heart racing at the thought of the coffer she had discovered hidden beneath the pile of dusty books in the library. The weight of its potential significance pressed down on her, and she hesitated before answering. I think we should focus on what we've lost first, Victor. The coffer can wait. His expression hardened. You don't understand. This isn't just about the mansion. It's about our future. If there's something in there that can help us recover, we need to know. Eloise, standing beside her husband, crossed her arms defensively. And what if it doesn't? What if it only exposes more problems? Some things are better left buried. Like your past, Julian retorted, a hint of bitterness in his tone. The tension in the air thickened, and Margaret sensed that the family was on the brink of unraveling. Enough! Victor snapped, his frustration boiling over. We're discussing our survival here. We can't afford to be sentimental. Margaret stepped forward, her voice steady but firm. This isn't merely about survival, Victor. It's about confronting the truth, whatever it may reveal. If you're willing to open that coffer, you must also be prepared for what you might find inside. Julian, shifting uncomfortably, finally spoke up. Maybe Margaret is right. We can't just ignore what's happening to us. We need to address our problems head-on. Eloise scoffed, her eyes narrowing. And what do you know about facing problems, Julian? You're the one who's been running from them. Stop, all of you, Clara interjected, her voice rising above the fray. We're all hurting right now. We need to stick together, not tear each other apart. Margaret watched as the family's facade began to crack. She felt a surge of determination. I propose we take a moment to reflect on our individual struggles before we open that coffer, she suggested. Let's confront our fears and truths first. Only then can we face whatever lies within that coffer. Victor opened his mouth to argue, but a look from Clara silenced him. The room was thick with unspoken tension, and Margaret could see the uncertainty in their eyes. Slowly, one by one, they began to acknowledge the weight of their own burdens. Fine, Victor relented, his voice low. But I want to know what's in that coffer soon. Agreed, Julian nodded, his tone more subdued. But let's start by being honest with ourselves. Margaret led them to the remnants of the grand living room, now filled with ash and debris. The family settled into a makeshift circle, the air heavy with anticipation. Who wants to start? She asked gently. Clara took a deep breath, her voice trembling. I'll go. I've been hiding from my own life, my relationship. It's been toxic, and I've let it consume me. I thought I could change him, but I realize now that I need to change myself. Victor's gaze softened. Clara, I had no idea. You deserve so much more than that. She nodded, tears pooling in her eyes. I need to break free. I want to reclaim my life and my happiness. Good for you, Clara. Julian encouraged, his expression earnest. It takes courage to admit that. Margaret felt a swell of pride for Clara, but there was still more to uncover. Victor, how about you? Victor's shoulders slumped, his bravado fading. I've been so focused on the money, on getting back what we lost, that I've neglected what truly matters. I pushed everyone away in my pursuit of wealth. His voice shook with emotion. I thought if I could regain our fortune, everything would be okay. But now, I realize it's not worth it if I lose my family in the process. Eloise's expression softened as she watched her husband struggle. We've all been so caught up in our own worlds. I've been hiding my own fears, afraid of losing my status and the image we've built. But I can't keep pretending anymore. Julian looked at his mother, visibly moved. We're all flawed, Mom, but we can't let our past mistakes define us. We need to support one another instead of hiding behind our masks. Margaret smiled, feeling a sense of hope beginning to blossom. You're all making significant strides. Acknowledging your fears is the first step toward healing. As they shared their vulnerabilities, the tension in the room began to dissipate. The family found comfort in one another's honesty, and for the first time, they felt a glimmer of unity amidst the chaos. But Margaret knew they weren't done yet. There was still much to uncover, and the coffer loomed ominously in the background, a reminder of the truths they had yet to face. Let's not forget, there's still the coffer to open, she said, her voice steady. We can't shy away from what it may reveal. It's essential we face it together, fortified by this newfound honesty. Victor nodded, his expression resolute. You're right, Margaret. We need to confront whatever lies ahead. As the family prepared to delve into the unknown, Margaret felt a wave of anticipation. This moment of vulnerability had laid the groundwork for change. And though the truth may be painful, it was a necessary step toward healing. Whatever happens, we'll face it together, Clara said, her voice filled with newfound strength. Margaret looked around at the family she had dedicated her life to. Despite the ashes of their past, she could see the flicker of hope igniting within them. Each secret unveiled was a step toward a brighter future, one where love and honesty could flourish. And as Margaret prepared to guide them through the next chapter, she felt a sense of purpose. She was no longer just a governanta. She was an integral part of their journey toward redemption. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the charred remains of the Renshaw mansion. The air was thick with the acrid scent of smoke, and the once grand estate now stood as a haunting silhouette against the autumn sky. Inside the remnants of the library, the atmosphere was charged with unspoken words and hidden truths. Margaret, the devoted housekeeper, stood at the center of the chaos, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders. "Victor, you need to calm down," Eloise said, her voice trembling slightly as she turned to face her brother. "This isn't the time for accusations." Victor glared at her, his jaw clenched. "Not the time? We just lost everything, Eloise. Everything we worked for. If that coffer holds what I think it does, it could save us. Or ruin us," Eloise countered, folding her arms protectively across her chest. She could feel the icy fingers of fear creeping up her spine. "We don't even know what's inside. It could be worse than we imagined." As the siblings bickered, Julian stood slightly apart, staring into the distance, lost in thought. His mind raced with the implications of the coffer. "What if it's just junk? What if it leads to more problems?" he murmured, almost to himself. Clara, his younger sister, shifted uncomfortably. "We have to find out. We can't just ignore it, can we?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, but the determination in her eyes was unmistakable. Margaret watched the family unravel before her eyes, feeling an odd sense of responsibility. They were her family too, in a way, despite the decades of hierarchy that had placed her beneath them. She cleared her throat, drawing their attention. "I think we should all sit down and talk about this before we open the coffer," she suggested, her voice steady despite the tremors in her heart. Victor scoffed. "Talk? We need action, Margaret. We need to know what we're dealing with." "Action without understanding can lead to disaster," she replied, her gaze unwavering as she met Victor's fierce eyes. "Each of you is carrying burdened secrets that could change everything. Perhaps before we delve into the contents of that coffer, we should confront our own truths." Eloise shifted uncomfortably, her face pale. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Margaret continued, "that the fire has stripped away your home, your possessions, but it's also stripped away the facades you've all been hiding behind. Let's face what's real before we confront what's hidden." Victor opened his mouth to protest, but Julian stepped in. "Maybe she's right. I mean, look at us. We're falling apart. If there's something in that coffer that could tear us further apart, maybe we should be prepared." Clara nodded, her eyes wide. "I don't want to lose you all. Not now." The siblings shared a glance, and slowly, they began to see the wisdom in Margaret's words. They had been so wrapped up in their own fears and anger that they had forgotten the bonds that held them together. "Fine," Victor relented, though the frustration still simmered beneath the surface. "Let's talk. But I'm not going to just sit here and pretend like I'm not dying to know what's in that coffer." Margaret's heart swelled with a mix of pride and concern. She knew the road ahead would be challenging, but perhaps this was a moment they needed to begin healing. "Let's start with you, Victor," she suggested gently. "What's weighing on your mind?" Victor hesitated, his bravado faltering for the first time. "I've worked my whole life to build this empire," he admitted, his voice low. "And now it's all gone. I feel like I've failed." Clara reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "You haven't failed us, Victor. We're still here. We can rebuild." Eloise scoffed. "Rebuild what? A house of cards? Based on lies?" "Enough!" "Eloise," Julian interjected. "This isn't helping. We need to focus on what really matters." "Then let's start with you, Eloise," Margaret said, turning her gaze to the eldest Renshaw sibling. "What secrets are you holding?" Eloise's face paled, and for a moment, she seemed to shrink under the weight of their scrutiny. There's nothing to say," she stammered, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. "Don't lie to us," Victor shot back, frustration boiling over. "We can feel the tension. Just tell us." With a shaky breath, Eloise met their gazes. "Fine. There's something I've kept from you all," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "A few years ago, I made a mistake. I had an affair with someone I shouldn't have. I thought I could keep it hidden, but what if it comes out now?" The room fell silent, the weight of her confession hanging heavy in the air. Clara's eyes widened, and Julian looked stunned. Victor, however, was the first to break the silence. "Who was it?" he demanded, his tone sharp. "I can't say," Eloise replied, tears brimming in her eyes. "It was a moment of weakness, and I regret it every day." Margaret stepped forward, sensing the turmoil rising within the family. "Eloise, your honesty is a step toward healing. No one is perfect. We all have our mistakes." "But this isn't just about me," Eloise exclaimed, her voice rising. "What if it impacts all of us? What if they find out? It could ruin everything. Then we face it together," Julian said firmly. "We can't let fear dictate our lives anymore." The tension in the room shifted, the air thick with unspoken fears and unresolved conflicts. Margaret felt a swell of determination. "Julian, what about you? What are you hiding?" Julian swallowed hard, unable to meet their eyes. "I've been struggling with my finances, with addiction," he admitted, his voice quiet. "I thought I could manage it. I thought I could handle it alone." Clara's eyes filled with tears as she reached out to him. "You're not alone, Julian. You never were. We're here for you." Victor's expression softened, and for the first time, he seemed to see his brother not as a burden, but as a family member in need of support. "We'll figure this out together, I promise," he said, his voice filled with newfound empathy. Margaret felt a rush of pride as she watched the siblings begin to connect on a deeper level, their walls slowly crumbling. "And Clara, what about you?" she asked gently. Clara hesitated, her gaze darting between her brothers and sister. "I've been in a relationship that I know isn't healthy," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I thought it was love, but it's not. It's controlling. I feel trapped." Victor's expression hardened. "You need to get out of that, Clara. No one deserves to feel trapped." Eloise nodded in agreement. "You're stronger than you think. You deserve better." As Clara felt the warmth of her family's support enveloping her, she took a deep breath. "I know I need to make a change. I just don't know how." Margaret stepped forward, her heart swelling with compassion. "You have to trust yourself, Clara. You have the strength within you to break free." The room was filled with a newfound energy, a sense of unity that had long been missing. They were all flawed, each carrying their burdens, but in this moment, they were also connected by their shared struggles and the desire for healing. "Now that we've all shared," Margaret said, her voice steady, "perhaps it's time to consider what lies ahead. The coffer may hold the key to our future, but we need to face our past first." Victor nodded, a newfound determination in his eyes. "I think we're ready." Eloise wiped her tears, finding strength in her family's solidarity. "Let's do this together." Julian and Clara exchanged glances, both feeling a sense of relief wash over them. They were no longer alone in their struggles. They had each other, and together they could face whatever came next, with their hearts open and their burdens shared. The Renshaw siblings stood united, ready to confront the mysteries of the coffer and the truths that awaited them within. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting an eerie orange glow over what remained of the Renshaw mansion. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid scent of charred wood, a somber reminder of the family's recent tragedy. Inside the temporary shelter they had set up in the nearby community center, the atmosphere was tense and fraught with anxiety. Julian paced back and forth, his brow furrowed with worry. He could feel the weight of his mounting debts pressing down on him. The looming figure of the coffer in his mind was becoming more than just a box. It was his last hope, a potential lifeline in a sea of desperation. He stopped abruptly, his voice rising above the murmurs. "I can't just sit here, waiting for things to get better. We need to open that coffer tonight. It might have the answers we're looking for." Eloise, seated at a table by the window, looked up with a mixture of horror and disbelief. "Julian, are you out of your mind? We have no idea what's inside that thing. It could ruin us." Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke, betraying her inner turmoil. Victor, who had been staring blankly at the wall, finally turned to face his children. "We need to think strategically. If there's anything valuable in there, we can't let it slip away. This is our chance to regain what we've lost." His voice was steely, but his eyes flickered with uncertainty. The fire had taken their home, but it also ignited a fierce desperation within him to restore their former glory. "Maybe it's not just about money, Dad," Clara interjected, her voice small but firm. She had been quietly listening to the debate, feeling the tension wash over her. "Maybe we should be focusing on what we really need, like healing and moving forward." She glanced at Margaret, who was sitting quietly in the corner, her eyes filled with wisdom and compassion. Clara felt a strange sense of comfort in Margaret's presence, as if she were the only anchor in this chaotic storm. "Clara's right," Margaret said, her voice steady and soothing. "Opening that coffer might not bring you the answers you're hoping for. Sometimes, the truth can be more devastating than the loss itself." She had seen families torn apart by secrets, and she didn't want to witness another tragedy unfold. "Margaret," Victor replied, frustration creeping into his tone, "you've spent so many years in this house, serving us. You don't understand what's at stake for us now. This isn't just about pride. It's about survival." Julian, feeling the pressure of his father's words, leaned closer, his voice low but urgent. "I'm drowning in debt, Dad. If there's something valuable in that coffer, it could save me. I can't wait any longer." His eyes darted between Victor and Eloise, searching for understanding. Eloise shook her head, her expression a mix of fear and resolve. "You're being naive, Julian. What if it's something that could destroy us? What if it reveals the truth about our family that we've tried so hard to bury?" She felt a knot tightening in her stomach, memories of a past she wished to forget bubbling to the surface. "Then we deal with it," Victor snapped, his voice rising. "We can't afford to shy away from the truth anymore. We've lost everything. It's time to fight for what we have left." His determination hung in the air, palpable and heavy. Clara's heart raced as she felt the tension escalate. What if we just take a moment? She stood up, trying to defuse the situation. "What if we don't open the coffer tonight? Can't we just think about it? Collect our thoughts?" Julian shook his head vehemently, the desperation rising within him. "No, we need to make a decision now. I can't keep living like this, waiting for a miracle. I need to know what's inside that coffer." Margaret observed the exchanges, her heart aching for the family she had served for decades. She could see the desperation in their eyes, the fear of the unknown driving them to the brink. "Perhaps we should all take a step back and reflect on what this coffer really means for each of you," she suggested gently. "It's not simply a box of treasures. It's a reflection of your family's legacy." "Legacy?" Victor scoffed, shaking his head. "What legacy? Look around. Our legacy is ashes. We're nothing without our fortune." His voice cracked, revealing a fleeting vulnerability beneath his bravado. "Dad, I don't care about the money," Julian exclaimed, his voice rising in frustration. I just want to know where we stand. I can't go on living like this, pretending everything is fine when it's not. If the coffer has answers, I want them. I need them." The room fell silent, the weight of Julian's words hanging. In the air, Clara looked at her brother, her heart aching for him. "Julian, what if we open it and it doesn't hold the answers? What if it just brings more pain? Isn't that better than living in a lie?" Julian shot back, his voice rising again. "I can't keep pretending everything is okay. I need to know what I'm dealing with." Margaret felt the tension shift in the room. This was more than just about a coffer. It was about their lives, their futures, and the unraveling of their family secrets. "You all have to understand," she said, her voice steady, "that opening that coffer will require each of you to confront your own truths. Are you ready for that?" Julian hesitated, his bravado faltering. "I just want to fix things," he murmured. I don't want to keep struggling." Clara stepped closer to her brother, her heart full of empathy. "And it's okay to want that, Julian. But we need to think about how we can face whatever is inside together. We can't let it destroy us. Maybe we can wait until morning," Eloise suggested, her voice softer now. "Let's just take a night to breathe. We've all been through so much today. We owe it to ourselves to consider this carefully." Victor sighed, rubbing his temples. "Fine, we'll wait. But I can't shake the feeling that this coffer might be our only chance. It feels like we're delaying the inevitable." As the family fell into a heavy silence, Margaret watched them, her heart heavy with the burden of their choices. She understood their pain all too well, the desperation to hold on to something, anything, in the face of unimaginable loss. That night, Margaret lay in her small room at the community center, staring at the ceiling. She thought about the coffer and what it might hold. Would it be a blessing or a curse? As she drifted off to sleep, she hoped that whatever the truth was, it would lead them to a place of healing rather than further division. The next day dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the darkness that loomed over the Renshaw family. Julian rose early, the weight of his decision pressing heavily on him. He glanced out the window, watching as the sun rose over the remnants of the mansion. The coffer was calling to him, whispering promises of hope and redemption. He made his way downstairs, determined to face his family. They needed to talk. As he entered the community center, he found Clara sitting at a table, her fingers nervously tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "Hey," he said softly, taking a seat across from her. "Can we talk?" "Of course," Clara replied, her eyes meeting his. "I'm worried about you, Julian." "I'm worried about all of us," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I can't keep running from this. I need to know what's in that coffer." Clara nodded, her expression understanding. "I get it, I do. But remember what Margaret said, this isn't just about the coffer. It's about us facing our truths." "I know," he said, taking a deep breath. "But I can't bear the thought of being stuck in this limbo any longer. I need to know where we stand." As they spoke, Eloise and Victor joined them, and Julian could feel the tension rising again. The moment of truth was approaching, and he could sense that they were all thinking the same thing. "Okay," Victor said, his voice steady. "Let's gather together and decide what to do about the coffer. We can't keep avoiding it." With heavy hearts, they made their way to the temporary shelter set up outside the remnants of the mansion. The sight of the charred remains was a stark reminder of their loss, but it was also a catalyst for their transformation. They needed to confront the past and move forward. As they stood in front of the coffer, Julian felt a surge of determination. This was it. This was their moment. With trembling hands, he reached for the latch, his heart pounding in his chest. The family stood behind him, a mix of fear and anticipation in their eyes. "Are we ready?" he asked, glancing back at them. Eloise took a deep breath, nodding slowly. "Let's do this." With one final glance at the faces of his family, Julian opened the coffer, ready to face whatever lay within. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the remnants of the Renshaw estate. The air was thick with anticipation and anxiety as Margaret stood before the coffer, her heart pounding against her chest. The moment had finally arrived. The family, drawn by the gravity of the moment, was gathered around her, their expressions a mixture of hope and dread. "Are we really going to do this?" Victor's voice broke the silence, a tremor of uncertainty creeping into his tone. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his eyes darting from the coffer to his siblings. Despite his bravado, the facade was crumbling, and for the first time he seemed vulnerable. Margaret took a deep breath. The scent of burnt wood still lingering in the air, a stark reminder of their loss. "We need to know what's inside." "It's time to face our past," she replied, her voice steady as she looked at each family member. Victor's obsession with wealth had always overshadowed their relationships. But now, with everything at stake, the truth could no longer be ignored. Eloise, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, shifted uncomfortably. "What if it's something we don't want to know?" "Secrets can be dangerous," she murmured, her brow furrowed in worry. The memories of her past loomed large in her mind, a specter she could not shake off. "Or it could be the key to understanding everything," Julian interjected, his voice laced with desperation. He had been struggling for so long, and the thought of financial salvation through the coffer was too tempting to resist. "We can't keep living in the shadows. We need to know what we're dealing with." Clara, standing slightly apart from the others, felt the weight of her brother's words. The turmoil in her own life had drawn her to this moment, and she could sense the change that was brewing within her family. "Whatever it is, we need to be united. We can't let this tear us apart," she said softly, her gaze shifting to Margaret, who had become a source of strength for her. Margaret nodded, her heart swelling with pride for the young woman who had once felt so lost. "You're right, Clara. We must face this together as a family," she said, placing her hand on the coffer, feeling its cold surface beneath her fingers. The key to the lock lay within her pocket, heavy with meaning. As Margaret fumbled with the key, the collective breath of the Renshaws seemed to hold in the air. Victor leaned in closer, his eyes glued to the lock, while Eloise turned her gaze away, as if fearing what lay beyond the metal door. Julian's hands trembled, and Clara bit her lip, a mix of excitement and trepidation swirling within her. With a decisive turn of the key, the lock clicked open, the sound resonating in the silence like a gunshot. Margaret hesitated, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She glanced at each family member, searching for a sign of encouragement, and found it in Clara's steadfast gaze. "Here we go," she whispered, lifting the lid of the coffer slowly. The hinges creaked ominously, as if warning them of the revelations to come. Inside, a collection of documents, photographs, and old letters lay neatly arranged, dust motes dancing in the fading light. "What is this?" Victor leaned over, his curiosity piqued as he reached for the first document. It was a ledger, its pages yellowed with age. He scanned the lines, his expression shifting from confusion to shock. This is a financial record. It looks like it details transactions." Margaret felt her heart race. The contents of the coffer were beginning to unfold like a dark tapestry, revealing threads that had long been hidden. "Read it out loud, Victor," she urged, unable to suppress her own intrigue. He cleared his throat, his voice shaky as he began to read. In the year 1985, the Renshaw family received a series of deposits from various offshore accounts. He trailed off, his face paling as the implications sank in. "These are not legitimate. They're illegal," Eloise gasped, taking a step back. "How could this be? Father always spoke of our family's success in business. He never mentioned anything like this." Her voice quivered, a mix of disbelief and fear. Julian's brow furrowed as he processed the information. What does it mean? Were we living a lie? His eyes darted between his siblings, seeking answers in their expressions. The weight of their heritage was suddenly a burden, one that threatened to crush them beneath its enormity. Margaret felt a surge of empathy for the siblings. "This doesn't change who you are," she said gently, trying to soothe the rising storm. "But it does reveal the truth about your family. It's important that we face it together." Victor's anger flared, his face reddening. Why didn't anyone tell us? We've been living in ignorance while the truth was hidden from us. This is unacceptable. He slammed the ledger down, the sound echoing in the room, a thunderclap in the midst of their emotional storm. "But it's not just about us." Clara spoke up, her voice rising above the din. "It's about everything we stand for. If we don't confront this, we'll be just as guilty of living a lie." Victor's eyes narrowed as he shot Clara a glare. "What do you know about lies? You've been drowning in your own for far too long." The harshness of his words cut deep, and Margaret instinctively stepped between them. "Enough," she said, her voice firm yet calm. "This isn't the time for blame. We need to understand what happened, to piece together the truth of our family. Look at this letter," she said, pulling out a folded piece of paper from the coffer. As she unfolded it, the unmistakable handwriting of the late Mr. Renshaw came into view. "Dear family," she began reading aloud, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "If you are reading this, it means that I have left this world without revealing the full story of our wealth. I have made choices that may haunt you, but I hope you'll understand that I did what I thought was necessary." A hush fell over the room as Margaret continued, her heart heavy with the weight of the words. The letter went on to detail decisions made in desperation, financial struggles that led to unethical choices, and a desperate need to maintain the family's image at all costs. "This is a confession," Julian whispered, his eyes wide. He knew what he was doing was wrong, but he did it anyway. Eloise bowed her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "We were raised to believe in the Renshaw name, to uphold its dignity. But what dignity is left when it's built on lies?" Margaret felt a pang of sorrow for the family she had served for so long. "You have the power to redefine what it means to be a Renshaw. You can choose to be better than your past," she said softly. "It's not too late to change the narrative." As they all stood there in the dim light, the coffer opened before them. The gravity of the moment settled in. The truth, once hidden beneath layers of deception, lay bare before them, and it was up to each of them to decide how they would move forward. Victor, still reeling from the revelations, looked at his siblings, his expression softening. "We have to face this together. I don't want to lose any more of us to this darkness," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. With that, a collective understanding began to form, a fragile thread of unity woven through their shared pain and the hope for redemption. As they stood in the ashes of their past, the Renshaw family felt the stirrings of something new a chance to rebuild, to acknowledge their flaws and ultimately to heal. The tension in the air was almost palpable as the family members stood around the now open safe, absorbing the weight of the secrets they had unearthed. The shock of discovering the true origins of the Renshaw fortune hung over them like a heavy fog, each revelation striking at the heart of their family ties. Victor, who had always prided himself on his business acumen, was now grappling with the very foundation of his identity. "Can you believe this?" Victor's voice trembled, a mix of anger and disbelief as he scanned the documents strewn across the table. "All these years, we've built our lives on lies, fraud, betrayal." He slammed his fist on the table, the sound echoing through the charred remnants of the mansion. Eloise stepped back, her face pale, the weight of her own past crashing down upon her. "Victor, yelling isn't going to change anything. We need to focus on what this means for us now," she replied, her voice shaky. She felt her heart racing, knowing the skeletons in her closet were about to be exposed. As the tension grew, Julian, who had been silent until now, finally found his voice. "Maybe it's time we stop pretending everything is fine. We've been living in a facade for too long." His words came out in a rush, a mixture of desperation and newfound clarity. "I mean, look at us. We're a mess. I'm a mess." Clara watched her brother, her heart aching for him. She could see the pain etched on his face, the toll his addictions had taken on him. "Julian, it's okay to admit that," she said softly, stepping closer to him. "We're all struggling, but we can't keep running away from the truth. This dash," she gestured to the documents, "this is just the beginning." Victor scoffed, his frustration boiling over. "So what? We just accept that our family legacy is built on lies? You think that makes it easier?" "It doesn't matter what we think," Clara countered, her voice gaining strength. "What matters is what we do next. We need to face this together, or it will tear us apart." The room fell into a heavy silence as her words hung in the air. Margaret, who had been quietly observing the family dynamics, felt a surge of compassion for the siblings. She had witnessed their struggles over the years, each battling their own demons. "Perhaps the first step is to be honest with ourselves," she suggested, her voice steady and calm. "Julian, you've spoken about your struggles. It takes a lot of courage to admit that you need help." Julian glanced at Margaret, his expression softening. "I've been so ashamed," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I could handle it on my own, but I can't. I've lost everything to MY friends, my dignity." "Then let's start anew," Margaret encouraged, her eyes warm. "It's never too late to ask for help. You don't have to face this alone." Eloise's gaze shifted, and she felt her heart race. She had been hiding from her own truths for too long. I have something to say," she stammered, her hands trembling. "There's a reason I've distanced myself from all of you. It's not just the family's secrets. It's my own." Victor turned to her, incredulous. "What do you mean? You've always acted like you're above it all." Eloise took a deep breath, her mind racing with the weight of her confession. "I've made choices that I regret. I've hurt people, including you." Her voice broke slightly as she continued. "I was involved in things that could destroy our family's reputation, and I've been terrified that it would come out." Clara gasped, her eyes widening in shock. "What did you do?" "I had an affair with someone who was connected to our business," Eloise admitted, her voice cracking. "I thought I could manipulate the situation to our advantage, but it spiraled out of control. I'm so sorry." Victor's face turned pale as he processed her words. "You lied to us all this time, and now you're saying this? How could you?" "I was trying to protect you," Eloise exclaimed, tears streaming down her face. "I thought it would all blow over. I thought I could fix it, but it only got worse." Julian stepped forward, his own pain momentarily forgotten. "Eloise, we've all made mistakes. We're not perfect, but hiding from each other won't help us heal." Margaret watched the siblings, her heart swelling with pride as they began to confront their truths. "What matters now is that you're willing to be honest with each other. You have a chance to rebuild from this, to find support in one another." Victor rubbed his temples, the anger beginning to fade as he took in his sister's vulnerability. "I guess we've all been living in fear of the truth, but we can't keep this cycle going. It's destroying us. And it's time we face it together," Julian added. "We've been at war with ourselves for too long." "Then let's make a pact," Clara proposed, her voice strong and resolute. "From this point forward, we promise to be honest with each other. No more lies, no more hiding." "Agreed," Julian nodded, his eyes reflecting a glimmer of hope. Victor took a deep breath, the weight of his pride slowly lifting. "Fine, I'll do it. I'll be honest, even if it hurts. But we need to start rebuilding our lives, not just dwelling on the past." Margaret felt a surge of warmth in her heart as she witnessed the transformation taking place. "That's the spirit," she encouraged, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You're stronger together than you are apart. Lean on each other, and you can heal." With a newfound sense of unity, the family began to talk openly, sharing their fears and insecurities. As they bared their souls, the atmosphere shifted. The weight of their secrets began to lift, replaced by a sense of understanding and compassion. Hours passed as they delved deeper into their conversations, And for the first time in a long while, laughter punctured the heaviness in the room. They found solace in shared memories, reminiscing about happier times, and slowly, the bonds that had been frayed began to mend. As the sun began to set outside, casting a warm glow through the broken windows, Margaret felt a sense of fulfillment. She had witnessed a family take the first steps toward healing, and it filled her with hope. "Remember, the journey won't be easy," she reminded them gently. "But every step forward, no matter how small, is progress. Embrace it." Julian nodded, determination etched on his face. "We can do this. I can do this." Clara's eyes sparkled with newfound resolve. "And I'll be here to support you, no matter what." Eloise wiped her tears, a sense of relief washing over her. "I'm ready to face my past and make amends. Together, we can build a brighter future." Victor, looking at his siblings, realized the truth in Margaret's words. "We've got a long way to go, but at least now we're in this together." And as the family began to share their hopes and dreams for the future, Margaret felt a deep sense of belonging. She had spent decades as a caretaker of the Renshaw family, but now, in this moment of honesty and vulnerability, she understood that she was more than just a servant. She was part of a family, one that was beginning to heal, one that was finally ready to confront the truth together. The sun peeked through the lingering clouds, casting a soft glow over the remnants of the Renshaw mansion. The air, still tinged with the acrid smell of smoke, felt oddly lighter now as Margaret stood in the yard, watching the family she had served for decades begin to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. It was a moment of reckoning, not just for them, but for her as well. "Margaret," Victor called out, his voice a mix of exhaustion and newfound humility. He approached her, his shoulders slumped, as if the weight of the world had settled squarely on them. I wanted to thank you. You've always been the glue that held this family together, even when we didn't see it." Margaret turned to him, her heart swelling with a mix of pride and sadness. "Victor, you've been through so much. It's time to focus on what truly matters," she replied gently. "You have a chance to rebuild not just the house, but the relationships that have been strained." Victor nodded, glancing back at his siblings who were now engaged in quiet conversations, their past tensions simmering just beneath the surface. Clara was sitting on the steps, her eyes red from crying, while Julian talked with Eloise, their voices low, almost conspiratorial. It was a moment of vulnerability they had never shared before, and Margaret felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this fire had burned away the facade they all hid behind. "Do you think we can do it?" Victor asked, a hint of desperation creeping into his voice. "Can we really change?" Margaret placed a comforting hand on his arm. "Change doesn't happen overnight, but it starts with honesty. You all have to be willing to face the truth, even the uncomfortable parts." Just then, Clara stood up, brushing off her jeans as she approached them. "I overheard you talking about honesty," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. I think we need to talk about what happened before the fire. The secrets, the lies, they can't stay buried anymore." Victor shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting away from Clara. "Do we really have to go there? Can't we just move on?" Clara's expression hardened. "You don't get to choose that for us, Victor. We can't move on until we face what's been tearing us apart." Margaret watched as the siblings exchanged glances, each weighing the gravity of Clara's words. She took a step back, allowing them the space to confront each other. "Maybe Clara's right," Julian chimed in, his voice surprisingly firm. "I've made a lot of mistakes, and I need to own up to them. I can't keep running away from my problems, especially not after everything that's happened." "Running away is what we all do best," Eloise added, her tone sharper than she intended. "But look where it's gotten us." "Right," Clara snapped. "And it's not just you, Eloise. We all play a part in this mess. I've been hiding in a relationship that was toxic, and I let it affect how I viewed myself and my family. I don't want to do that anymore." Victor looked at each of them, realizing the truth in Clara's words. We need to be honest with each other, no matter how painful it might be. I think we owe it to ourselves and to Margaret, who has always been here. Margaret felt a swell of warmth at Victor's acknowledgement. She had dedicated her life to this family, and now, perhaps, they were finally beginning to see the value of their bond. "Let's sit down," she suggested, her voice calm and steady. "We can talk. All of us. No more secrets." They settled into a circle on the grass, the remnants of the mansion serving as a backdrop to their raw, candid discussion. Margaret led them, guiding the conversation with care. "Let's start with the truth," she encouraged. "What's been weighing on your hearts?" "I'll go first," Julian said, drawing a deep breath. "I've been using substances to escape my problems for years. I thought I could handle it, but I've been lying to myself and everyone around me. I'm tired of running. I want to change, but I need help." Tension replaced by empathy filled the air. Victor nodded, a look of understanding in his eyes. "I've been so wrapped up in maintaining our family's image that I neglected my own responsibilities. I put pressure on all of you to conform to this ideal, and I didn't even realize how damaging that was." "I'm not perfect either," Eloise admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I've made choices that have hurt this family, and I've hidden behind my privilege, thinking it would protect me. I was wrong." Clara nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I've been scared to stand up for myself, but that ends now. I need to prioritize my own well-being." Margaret watched as the siblings began to unravel their truths, the weight of their confessions lifting the burden of silence that had long haunted them. Each admission was a step toward healing, and she felt a growing sense of hope for their future. "Margaret, you've always been there for us," Clara said, her voice breaking the silence that had settled. "What about you? What do you think?" Margaret smiled softly, her heart swelling with affection. "I've spent my life caring for all of you, and in many ways, I've neglected myself. I've always felt like I was just a help. But now I realize that I am part of this family, whether you see it or not." Victor looked at her with newfound respect. "You are family, Margaret. You always have been." "Let's promise to be honest with each other from now on," Julian suggested, his voice stronger than before. "We need to communicate openly about our struggles and support each other." "I agree," Clara added. "No more hiding." Eloise looked around at her siblings, a tentative smile breaking through her earlier tension. "We can start fresh. We can be there for each other in a way we never have been before." As they sat together, the sun broke through the clouds, bathing them in warm light. Margaret felt a wave of emotion wash over her. The journey ahead would not be easy, but they were finally embarking on it together. "Remember," she said, her voice strong and steady, "a family is built on love, trust, and honesty. You've taken the first step today. Keep moving forward, and don't be afraid to lean on each other." With renewed determination, the Renshaw siblings began to share more of their hearts, their dreams, and their fears. Each story was met with compassion and understanding, forging a bond that had long been neglected. Margaret listened intently, her heart swelling with pride for the family she had served for so long, now standing united in their vulnerability. As the sun began to set, casting a golden hue over the remnants of their mansion, Margaret felt a sense of peace settle over her. They were not just a family of wealth. They were a family of resilience, ready to embrace the challenges ahead and learn from the mistakes of their past. In that moment, Margaret knew that the true healing had begun. As the sun dipped low in the sky, casting a warm golden hue over the small Connecticut town, the Renshaw family was busy preparing for their first community event since the fire. The air was filled with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. It was a chance for them to demonstrate their commitment to change after the tumultuous events that had unfolded in the wake of the mansion's destruction. Margaret stood in the kitchen, her hands deftly arranging a platter of freshly baked cookies. She could hear the chatter from the living room, where Victor was pacing back and forth, rehearsing his speech in a low murmur. The air was thick with the scent of vanilla and cinnamon, a comforting aroma that made Margaret feel a sense of purpose. She had spent years serving the Renshaw family, but now it felt as though she was finally part of something bigger than herself. "Margaret, do you think I should mention the fire in my speech?" Victor called out, his brow furrowed as he glanced toward the kitchen. "It feels important, but I don't want to dwell on the negative." Margaret paused, her heart aching for the man who had once been so consumed by wealth and status. "Victor, it might be wise to acknowledge it, but focus on how it has brought us all together. People appreciate honesty, especially in difficult times." Victor nodded, his expression softening. "You're right. I've been so focused on the past, I forgot about the present." In the living room, Julian and Clara were setting up a booth filled with pamphlets on mental health resources. After their own struggles, they were determined to share their experiences and encourage others to seek help. Clara looked at her brother, a glimmer of determination in her eyes. "We need to make sure people know. They're not alone. That's the most important part of this." Julian agreed, his fingers brushing against the glossy paper of the pamphlets. "Yeah, and if we can help even one person, it'll all be worth it. We've been given a second chance. We owe it to others to pay it forward." As the event time drew closer, the family began to arrive at the community center. The space was decorated with simple banners that read, "Renshaw Family, a new beginning." The townspeople trickled in, their faces a mix of curiosity and support. Margaret watched from the sidelines, her heart swelling with pride as she observed the family engaging with the community. "Look who finally decided to show up," a familiar voice chimed. It was Mrs. Henderson, an elderly neighbor who had been a friend to the Renshaws for years. "I was beginning to think you all had forgotten how to socialize." "Never. Just taking some time to reflect." Victor replied with a smile, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "We're ready to show everyone the new us." As the event began, Victor took the stage, his heart racing as he faced the gathering crowd. He cleared his throat, remembering Margaret's words about honesty. "Thank you all for being here today. As many of you know, our family has gone through some difficult times recently. Losing our home in a fire was devastating. But it has also been a moment of reflection for us. We've come to realize what truly matters in life: family, community, and honesty." The crowd nodded, some murmuring in agreement. Margaret felt a wave of relief wash over her. Victor was finding his voice. "We're here today not just to share our story, but to connect with all of you. We understand the importance of support, especially in tough times, and we want to be a part of that for our community." Just then, Clara stepped up beside Victor, her cheeks flushed with a mix of excitement and nerves. "And we want to share our journey of recovery," she said, her voice steady. "Mental health is just as important as physical health, and we've learned that asking for help is a sign of strength, not weakness." Julian joined her, standing tall. "We've created a booth over there with resources and information. We encourage everyone to stop by and talk to us. We're all in this together." The townspeople began to clap, and Margaret felt tears prick at her eyes. This was the family she had always known. They could be vulnerable, open, and committed to making a difference. The atmosphere was alive with hope as they shared their stories and invited others to do the same. As the speeches wrapped up, families began to mingle, and the Renshaws found themselves surrounded by neighbors eager to connect. Victor was deep in conversation with Mr. Thompson, a local businessman, discussing potential projects they could collaborate on to help the community rebuild after the recent crisis. "Your family has always been a cornerstone of this town, Victor," Mr. Thompson said, his voice full of sincerity. "It's good to see you giving back. We need leaders like you." Meanwhile, Clara had found herself chatting with a group of young women, sharing her story of overcoming an abusive relationship. "It's so hard to talk about, but I realize that I'm not alone in this," she said earnestly. "It's okay to seek help, and it's okay to walk away from toxic situations." One of the women, tears in her eyes, nodded. "Thank you for sharing that. I've been in a similar situation, and it's hard to see a way out." Clara reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. You're stronger than you think. It's never too late to take back your power. As the evening wore on, the atmosphere grew more festive. There were laughter and shared stories, and for the first time in a long while, the Renshaws felt a sense of belonging. Margaret moved around the room, refilling plates and pouring drinks, her heart swelling with joy as she watched the family she had devoted her life to finally embrace their true selves. "Margaret, come over here," Julian called, waving her over to the booth. "We want to introduce you to everyone." With a gentle smile, she approached them, feeling a bit shy. The young women Clara had been talking to now turned their attention to her. "This is Margaret, the heart of our family," Julian announced proudly. "She's been with us through thick and thin. Thank you for everything you've done for them," one of the women said, her expression sincere. "You've raised such a wonderful family." Margaret felt a warmth spread through her, and she replied softly, "It's been my privilege to care for them. They've taught me just as much as I've taught them." As the night continued, Margaret found herself pulled into conversations, sharing her own stories of resilience and love. The community embraced her as one of their own, and for the first time, she felt that she belonged not just as a servant, but as a cherished member of the Renshaw family and the larger community. When the event began to wind down, Margaret gathered the family together for a moment of reflection. "I'm so proud of all of you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You've shown strength and vulnerability. You've opened your hearts and reached out to others. That's the true essence of family." Victor nodded, a newfound humility in his expression. "We couldn't have done this without you, Margaret. You've always been our guiding light." As they stood together, surrounded by their neighbors, Margaret realized that they had built something far more valuable than their lost mansion, a community rooted in honesty, support, and love. They had faced their past, embraced their truths, and were ready to step into a brighter future together. The Renshaw family had truly begun their journey of renewal, and Margaret was right there with them, finally feeling at home. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden glow over the remnants of the Renshaw estate, Margaret stood alone in the quiet of the library. The charred remains of what had once been a grand home surrounded her. Yet amidst the devastation, something extraordinary was about to unfold. She had spent years in this house, a silent witness to the lives of the Renshaw family, and now it felt like fate had brought her to this very moment. While the family gathered in the living room, discussing the fallout from the revelations of the coffer, Margaret felt a stirring in her heart. She had been so focused on helping the family confront their demons that she had almost forgotten the coffer itself. But now, a sense of urgency propelled her forward. What secrets lay within it? Taking a deep breath, she approached the coffer, which still stood defiantly amidst the disarray. With trembling hands, she lifted the lid, the hinges creaking as if they were whispering ancient secrets. Inside, she found documents, letters, and photographs, all meticulously organized in a way that suggested they had been preserved for a reason. As she sifted through the papers, her heart raced. There were legal documents, property deeds, and even a marriage certificate that caught her eye. "Margaret!" A voice called from behind her. It was Victor, his eyes wide with a mix of curiosity and concern. "What are you doing?" She turned, clutching the documents tightly, and replied, "Victor, you need to see this. There's something here that might change everything." He approached cautiously, peering over her shoulder. "What do you mean?" "Look at this," she said, holding up a letter that had been tucked away in a folder. "It's addressed to your father, but it's signed by someone named Eleanor. She mentions a legacy, a fortune, and there's something about me." Victor's brow furrowed. "What do you mean, something about you?" "Just read it," she urged, handing him the letter. As he read, the color drained from his face. "This can't be true," he stammered, glancing between the letter and. "Margaret, it says you were his confidant, and it appears you're entitled to a portion of the family fortune." Margaret felt a whirlwind of emotions. "I was just the governess. I never wanted anything from this family other than to serve them. But this changes everything. Victor's eyes narrowed, a mix of greed and realization flickering across his face. You could help us, Margaret. If what this letter says is true, we could rebuild. We could start over. Margaret shook her head, her heart heavy. I don't want your money, Victor. What I want is for this family to be whole again. You've all been through so much. Money won't solve your problems. As they spoke, Julian entered the room, his face pale and drawn. What's going on? He asked, sensing the tension. Margaret found something, Victor replied, his voice tinged with excitement. Something that could change our fortunes. Julian stepped closer, curiosity piqued. What is it? Margaret took a deep breath and explained. This letter indicates that I may be entitled to a part of the family fortune, a legacy that was never spoken of. Julian's eyes widened. You? But why would you be mentioned in a letter like this? You were just our governess. That's not just it, Victor interjected, excitement building in his voice. If she is indeed an heir, then she has a say in how this family moves forward. Margaret, you could help us. We need a plan. At that moment, Clara stepped into the library, her expression reflecting a mix of confusion and hope. What's happening? I heard voices. Margaret found a letter that says she might be part of the family's legacy, Julian explained, his tone oddly reverent. Clara's brow furrowed. Really? You? But you've always been just Margaret. Just Margaret, Margaret repeated, a hint of hurt creeping into her voice. I spent decades caring for all of you. I've seen your struggles, your triumphs, and your pain. I may not have been born into the family, but I've been here through it all. I've loved you all as my own. Eloise appeared at the doorway, her face pale but curious. What's this about a letter? She asked, her voice steady but her eyes betraying her anxiety. Margaret found a letter that could change everything, Victor said, his tone still charged with ambition. It seems she may have acclaimed a part of the family fortune. Eloise's expression shifted, a flicker of fear crossing her features. Margaret, you can't possibly consider this. We've worked so hard to rebuild our lives after the fire. We can't let money come between us again. Margaret's heart ached at the skepticism in Eloise's voice. I don't want your money. I want you all to face your truths, to confront what this family has been hiding for so long. The fire has forced us to reconsider what is truly valuable. Margaret, Victor pressed, urgency creeping into his tone. If you are indeed a part of this family's legacy, you could help us make a new beginning. We can't let this opportunity slip away. Margaret looked around at the faces she had loved for so long, sensing the weight of their expectations. But at what cost? Will it be worth it if it drives us further apart? The room fell silent, the air heavy with unspoken thoughts. It was Clara who finally broke the silence. What if this money could help us heal instead? What if it could allow us to help others? Margaret pondered this, her heart torn. But money can't buy love or trust, Clara. It can't mend the wounds we've created. As the family stood in the dim light of the library, the truth hung in the air like a dense fog. Finally, she turned back to the coffer, her fingers brushing against the remaining documents. There's more here, she said, her voice steadying with purpose. Let's see what else we can find. The family gathered around her, their initial excitement morphing into a collective resolve. As they sifted through the contents of the coffer, they discovered more. Letters, photographs, and records, all revealing the tangled history of the Renshaw family. Look at this, Julian said, holding up a faded photograph of a young Eleanor, Victor's grandmother, with a man Margaret didn't recognize. Who is he? Victor took the photograph, squinting at the image. That's my grandfather. But who is she holding? Margaret felt a shiver run down her spine. This letter here mentions a hidden affair. Secrets that could shatter your family's image. Eloise gasped, her hand covering her mouth. No, Perhaps it's time for the truth to come out, Margaret said gently, looking each of them in the eye. This family has been built on secrets for too long. It's time to break that cycle. The room was charged with emotion as each member of the family began to understand the weight of their history. They were not just the Renshaws, they were a tapestry of stories, mistakes, and love intertwined. In that moment, a realization dawned on them. The true fortune of the Renshaw family was not in the wealth they had accumulated, but in the relationships they had forged, the struggles they had overcome, and the honesty they were finally willing to confront. As they continued to explore the coffer, Margaret's heart swelled. She had spent her life supporting this family, and now it felt like they were finally beginning to see her as an equal. "You are all so much more than the money you've lost," she said softly. "You have the power to change your narrative." The family looked at her, their expressions shifting from skepticism to admiration. "Margaret, you've been our backbone all along," Julian said, his voice breaking. "We couldn't have done any of this without you." Victor stepped forward, his demeanor softened. "We've taken you for granted. You deserve to be a part of this family, not just as our governess, but as our equal." Margaret felt tears prick at her eyes as they embraced her. "I only want what's best for all of you. Together, we can face whatever comes next." In the glow of the fading light, the Renshaw family found themselves united in a way they had never experienced before. They were no longer just a wealthy family clinging to their possessions. They had become a family committed to facing their truths, building their relationships, and supporting each other through the storms of life. As they finished going through the coffer, Margaret found one last letter, hidden beneath the pile of documents. It was addressed to her from Eleanor herself. With trembling hands, she opened it and began to read, her heart racing as she realized that this letter was a heartfelt confession, acknowledging the love Eleanor had for her and the recognition of her unwavering loyalty. As she read the final lines, tears streamed down her face. "You are family, Margaret. Never forget that." With that, Margaret felt a profound sense of belonging wash over her. She was not merely a servant. She was a cherished member of the Renshaw family, and together they would forge a new path, one built on truth, love, and a commitment to one another. In that moment, Margaret understood that the true wealth of